On a warm August night in 1989, the laughter from palatial Beverly Hills mansion drifted into the dark streets like smoke, sweet, fleeting, and masking the fire that was about to erupt inside. Within hours, two parents would lie lifeless in a room built for comfort and power, their sons drenched in both gunpowder and destiny. To the world, Lyle and Erik Menendez were the picture of privilege. But behind the polished doors of 722 North Elm Drive, something unspeakable had been festering for years. From the outside, the Menendez estate was a monument to the American dream, a $4 million Spanish-style mansion, trimmed with palms and manicured hedges. Whisper success. The driveway curved like a silver ribbon, guiding guests past marble fountains into a home decorated in shades of cream and gold. Inside, the scent of imported leather and fresh lilies floated through the air. Every detail was curated by Kitty Menendez, a former beauty queen whose fading glamour had been replaced with an iron grip on appearances. Her husband, Jose Menendez, was the architect of this empire, a Cuban immigrant who rose from humble beginnings to become a Hollywood entertainment executive. But perfection here was a performance. The walls of that mansion heard things that would never appear in the glossy spreads of Beverly Hills magazines. Jose was a man forged in the fires of ambition. As a boy in Havana, he learned early that survival meant strategy. He escaped Cuba during political turmoil, attended Southern Illinois University on a swimming scholarship, and climbed corporate ladders with the intensity of someone who knew how quickly the ground could disappear beneath him. By 1989, he had secured his position as the head of RCA's home video division, wielding influence over film and television markets. But his success carried a sharp edge, one that cut into his family. To Jose, love was conditional. Perfection was mandatory. Failures, no matter how small, were met with cold, blistering lectures or humiliating silence. The boys, Lyle the elder and Erik the youngest, lived in a constant state of tightrope balance, forever calculating how to avoid their father's disapproval. Kitty, by contrast, was a public warmth to Jose's steel. In social settings, she smiled broadly, clutching champagne flutes and laughing at all the right cues. But behind closed doors, her mood could shift without warning. Years of living under Jose's dominance had eroded her confidence. Pills and vodka became her companions, depression her shadow. She knew what her husband was capable of, knew what her sons whispered about in the dead of night, and yet she did nothing. To outsiders, she was a devoted mother. To the boys, she was a betrayer in silence. Lyle, 21 in 1989, carried himself like a leader, but it was a brittle leadership born from surviving under Jose's regime. His smile was charming, his tennis whites immaculate, but his eyes darted with the awareness of someone always calculating escape routes. Erik, just 18, was quieter, his soft voice often betraying his discomfort in public. He excelled in tennis, ranking in junior circuits, but academically he struggled with a learning disability. What he lacked in confidence, he compensated for with obedience to Lyle. The two shared a bond that was both brotherly and conspiratorial, an unspoken alliance forged the shared experience of their father's wrath. Lyle would later testify that the abuse began when he was just 6. At first, it was subtle, inappropriate touches disguised as paternal affection. Then it grew more invasive, more disturbing, until it stopped abruptly when he was 8. Erik, however, endured for much longer. The details, whispered between the brothers in their rooms, were grim. Jose's threats were explicit. Tell anyone and I'll kill you. He controlled them not just through fear, but through the knowledge that their mother, aware of what was happening, would never intervene. By the summer of 1989, tensions were reaching a boil. Lyle had been kicked out of Princeton for plagiarism, though his parents kept it quiet. Erik had confided in friends about the abuse. That August, they told relatives they feared their father's anger over their failures. Still, they went through the motions of family life. Dinners at upscale restaurants, public tennis matches, weekend barbecues. But inside the mansion, arguments erupted almost daily. Erik feared that Jose was preparing to get rid of them for good. The day of the murders, the Menendez family attended a movie together, Batman, in a rare attempt at normalcy, but the atmosphere was tense. At home, a confrontation escalated. Erik would later claim his father threatened to kill them that night. Whether that threat was real or imagined, what happened next would erase the boundary between victim and perpetrator forever. It was just after 10 p.m. when the brothers retrieved 12-gauge shotguns from their car. They walked into the den where Jose and Kitty sat watching television. Jose barely had time to turn his head before the first blast struck him in the back of the head. He fell instantly. Kitty screamed, scrambling to escape, but she slipped on the polished floor. The brothers fired again and again, 10 shots in all, until the room was painted with finality. To outsiders, it would later seem like a mob execution. To the brothers, it was the culmination of years of fear and rage. At 11:47 p.m., Lyle's voice rang out over Los Angeles emergency lines. Frantic, shaking, almost believable. "Someone killed my parents," he cried. Police arrived to find 2 hysterical young men in blood-spattered tennis clothes. They told officers they'd gone to movies, returned to find their parents dead, and suspected a mob hit linked to Jose's business dealings. In the days that followed, the brothers seemed devastated. But their grief was threaded with something else. Within weeks, they were spending wildly. A $64,000 Porsche, Rolex watches, luxury condos, and nearly $700,000 gone in 6 months. At first, investigators bought the mob hit theory. But as the spending grew, so did suspicion. Police couldn't find evidence linking Jose to organized crime. What they did find was a pattern. The brothers avoided questions about the night. Their alibis were flimsy, and their spending spree looked less like mourning and more like celebration. They also learned of attempts to erase Jose's from his computer, deleting the only legal document that would clarify inheritance. Erik, racked with guilt, began seeing Dr. Jerome Oziel, a Beverly Hills therapist. In one session, he broke down and confessed the murders. Unbeknownst to him, Oziel's mistress would later tell police about the tapes of Erik's admission, setting off a chain of legal battles over doctor-patient privilege. The brothers didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. On March 8, 1990, Lyle was arrested outside the family mansion. 3 days later, Erik surrendered after flying back from Israel, where he had been playing tennis. The image of the once smiling Beverly Hills brothers in handcuffs shocked the nation. When the handcuffs clicked shut on Lyle and Erik Menendez, the nation didn't yet know what to believe. Were these the pampered sons of Beverly Hills, driven by greed to execute their own parents? Or were they abused boys, cornered by a father's monstrous appetites and a mother's unforgivable silence? In the courtroom, both truths would collide, and the world would be invited to watch. The arrest of the Menendez brothers hit Beverly Hills like an earthquake. For months, the community had rallied around them, donating food and condolences, treating them as tragic survivors. Now, those same neighbors stare at the TV, slack-jawed, watching them led away in designer sweaters, their hands shackled. The tabloids pounced. Murder in the mansion, rich kids kill for cash, the Beverly Hills horror. National TV shows dissected every frame of their early interviews, searching for signs of guilt. The brothers were separated in jail to prevent them from coordinating stories. Lyle retained attorney Jill Lansing, known for her sharp cross-examinations. Erik hired Leslie Abramson, a fierce defense lawyer with a mane of blonde curls and a voice like a whip crack. From the start, Abramson set the tone. This was not about greed. This was about survival. It was a radical defense. In 1989, abuse, especially sexual abuse within wealthy families, was almost never discussed openly in courtrooms, let alone used as a foundation of a murder defense. Prosecutors Pamela Bozanik and David Kahn painted a colder picture. The Menendez brothers were spoiled, entitled, and furious at their parents' control over the family fortune. When they realized they couldn't get their inheritance early, they decided to take it by force. Their evidence? A calculated double execution with no signs of struggle. The massive spending spree in the months after the murders. The attempt to delete Jose's will from his computer. To the prosecution, the abuse claims were a fabrication, a smokescreen to justify greed. The first trial, starting in 1993, became one of the most publicized legal spectacles in American history. Cameras were allowed in the courtroom, and the proceedings aired daily on court TV. Housewives, students, and retirees became amateur legal analysts, debating each witness's credibility over coffee. The Menendez brothers' testimonies were the emotional centerpiece. Lyle's voice broke as he described being molested at age 6. Erik, visibly shaken, recounted years of sexual abuse, the terror of hearing his father's footsteps at night, and the threats of death if they spoke out. Millions watched, transfixed. For some, the brothers were lying sociopaths. For others, they were the wounded sons of predator. By January 1994, the juries for both brothers, tried separately but simultaneously, were deadlocked. The defense had succeeded in planting reasonable doubt, but the prosecution had equally convinced others that greed was the motive. The mistrials were a gut punch to prosecutors. For the defense, they were a lifeline. The second trial began in October 1995, but this time the defense faced crippling limitations. No cameras allowed. Sexual abuse testimony heavily restricted. The brothers tried together before a single jury. Without the raw emotional impact of the first trial's abuse accounts, the prosecution's greed narrative dominated. Witnesses testified about the brothers' extravagant spending, Rolexes, luxury condos, and a Porsche bought within weeks of the murders. One witness claimed Lyle had spoken about getting rid of his parents years earlier. On March 20th, 1996, after weeks of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The brothers sat still, eyes forward. Kitty's relatives wept quietly. Jose's side of the family sat in stony silence. In July, Judge Stanley Weisberg sentenced them both to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court moved on. The public, too, shifted its gaze to the next high-profile trial. But for the Menendez brothers, the story was far from over. In the years that followed, Lyle and Erik were housed in separate prisons hundreds of miles apart. Letters became their only connection. They each married women from outside prison. Relationships nurtured through correspondence and supervised visits. Over time, their conduct in prison was exemplary. They mentored younger inmates, took on educational programs, and remained free of disciplinary actions. But outside prison walls, the narrative of greed or survival never fully died. Decades later, the conversation around abuse and trauma had shifted. The hashtag #MeToo movement forced society to confront long-ignored realities of sexual violence. Suddenly, the brothers' decades-old claims didn't seem as implausible to the public as they once had. New evidence emerged. A letter Erik wrote to his cousin describing abuse. A former member of the boy band Menudo came forward, claiming Jose Menendez had sexually abused him in the 1980s. These revelations reignited public debate and legal action. In October 2024, Los Angeles District Attorney George Gaskin recommended the brothers be resentenced to 50 years to life, making them eligible for parole. His reasoning: evolving understanding of abuse and trauma, combined with the brothers' model behavior in prison. It was a forgiveness, but it was a recognition that their original sentence might not fit the current legal climate. Before the process could be finalized, Gaskin lost re-election. His successor, Nathan Hochman, withdrew the support for resentencing, calling the brothers' abuse claims self-serving fabrications. The case might have died there, if not for Judge Michael Jezik. In April 2025, Judge Jezik ruled that the resentencing hearings could proceed. By May, he officially resentenced the brothers to 50 years to life, making them eligible for parole. It was a cautious victory. The brothers were not freed, but the door was finally open. As of today, Lyle and Erik Menendez await parole hearings. Their future lies in the hands of the parole board and California Governor Gavin Newsom. To some, they are manipulative killers who spun an abuse story to escape justice. To others, they are the tragic products of a gilded cage, driven to the unthinkable by years of torment. The question remains the same as it was in 1989. Was it greed or was it survival?